Sarah, welcome to Waterstones, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Sex, power, money.
Yes.
Where should we start?
It's funny because I've been doing lots of PR interviews and we have to keep omitting the sex.
Okay.
So they go, the book's called Sex, Power, Money. Let's talk about power. Just because like breakfast TV or on the radio and things.
Well, in that case, let's start with sex.
Yeah, we could start with sex. So originally, I'd written this book called Animal, which is about the female body and how it's treated in culture. And I had this idea that I would do a second book that would just be about the male body and how the male body is treated in culture. And I had this kind of joke with my editor, it would be called Manimal, and it would be the other side, and it would just be dealing with kind of men. And then I thought, oh, in that book, I'll deal with pornography, because I didn't in my first book. And it would just be a chapter about pornography and how most of the people who watch it are men and whether there's kind of evolutionary reasons. As I started researching into pornography, I realised, number one, that I didn't understand anything, that I was incredibly naive, that to write about it without doing extensive research would be a folly.
Yep.
Because I would be repeating things that I'd read, having never really seen any. Mm-hmm. And then when I started reading the studies about pornography, and when they have tried to find answers to questions like, does it make men more misogynist? Has it become more aggressive in the last 10 years? Things like that. I realised that some of the things that we all assume are true haven't been proven. Mm-hmm. So it was a much more of a grey area than I'd realised. And then as I was researching, the book completely changed shape, which can happen, much to obviously your editor's chagrin, when you're like, actually it's going to take me 2 years, and everything I said to you in the pitch is wrong, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what you're quite honest about the fact, actually, as you go through, you're doing a lot of research, and there are some facts,
yes,
if you will, that you're presented with, and you kind of go, oh, I don't like the idea of that.
Yes.
But it's just a fact, and that is what the research shows.
Well, that's it. So the trouble with studies is sometimes, for all of us, that the results of them don't fit with what we presume. And quite often that means, well, the study's never 100%, especially when something's along like sex or gender lines. Just because 60% of women, that still means 40% of women aren't. Mm-hmm. And also all of us are individuals, where just because that study of 200 people found those results actually doesn't say anything about you. But quite often my hackles would rise and go, I don't display jealousy in that way, or that's not how my sexuality feels for me. And so I think it's really quite healthy for all of us to go, oh, we have a subjective experience, and studies are never saying you, a man, are this or are that. But sometimes it's hard not to be confronted by things. I use the example of a petition that was going around when Ann Summers, the underwear shop, kind of were doing a joint campaign with Pornhub in terms of like sexy nights in, and there's a list of titles of pornography, and even those I found a lot of them very upsetting, because of the violence, anger, misogyny, and then some of the acts involved. Even if everyone is absolutely consenting and it's part of a day's work, I still don't want to watch them. But then that's true of like some films, like action films or fighty films, or there's just certain things that I don't like watching. Aggression in general, actually. But I did think, I know what I'll do. I'll find a couple of the worst porns and I'll just watch them, and then I'll write about my reaction. And I had it on a post-it note on my computer, and I kept avoiding it, and I just realised, oh, I'm not going to. I'm just not going to watch them. Like I wouldn't watch like Two Girls, One Cup, which a few younger people had said to me when I was researching, oh, that was my first kind of experience of pornography. It's the first time I knew that there was porn on the internet, was at school, and when we watched Two Girls, One Cup. And again, you read the description and I go, no, I'm all right, I don't want to I don't want to watch it. I don't want to watch it. I can imagine, I can imagine it, but I don't need to put myself through it.
After all of the things that you have watched and the research you've done into the actual statistics, and you mentioned that fear of pornography making men more misogynist.
Yeah.
Would you say that you now feel more relaxed about pornography or worse about it?
I don't think that it's that I feel more relaxed or worse. I think it's really interesting to know what has been studied, because as my mum made the very valid point, just because something hasn't been proved, it doesn't mean it's not true. Yeah. And so actually what I felt like is that there has to be so much more study, and rather than us having all of these kind of collective fears about what's happening to young people or what it might do, we have to study it so that we can kind of educate them alongside.
You're looking at sex work, but also the transactional nature of all sex and relationships in a way. And you and I share a bugbear, which is the fetishization of the bill paying on first dates, which always makes me mad.
Yes. Well, apparently, I found out since I wrote the book, apparently they give them money to go on it, but they always give the money to the man. Right, which actually makes it even worse.
Yes.
As in, because in TV land, this when I first noticed it, or started watching the show, I realised they were filming it in a way so you always saw that moment where in heterosexual couples the man made this flourish of "don't worry, I'm going to get this," and I thought, what an odd moment. And then I started to realise, oh, it's in there because it's supposed to look like what a nice guy he is, or what a lucky woman she is. And I thought, isn't it strange that we're getting this very insidious message at the same time as a society we're talking about perhaps the wage gap between the genders, or perhaps certain jobs that are underpaid because the majority of people do them are women, like kind of midwifery or nursing. And I thought, how unhealthy to have that conversation going on when this is kind of mainstream television. And it's really odd the pushback against it, because there are absolutely lots of women who 100% believe that it's just a nice thing to do. It's just what should be done. It just gives you a little nice feeling. It's just one of those roles. But we really do have to deconstruct those roles, even if we think there's no harm in it and it's quite romantic. I think there is harm in it, really.
As you say, it reinforces not only an old-fashioned idea, but also this. You talk about how capitalism has a real part to play in how relationships can be not ruined, but sort of the nature of them becomes transactional.
Yes. Yeah, well, but marriage itself was always transactional, and that's what's odd, because for most of us in our society now, we think of that as a romantic decision, but all of the structure of it is the remnant, again, in heterosexual couples, of men used to earn enough to provide for a family, and women essentially went from being their father's property to their husbands. And while that isn't the lived truth for lots of people now, that is still the kind of the ceremony, and even the idea that, I mean, I don't know anyone whose husband didn't propose to them. So there's lots of conversations culturally about equality, but still it's up to the man, and he has to kind of make an effort. He has to spend his own money on jewellery, and there's things that I think that need questioning at the very least. I'm not saying you have to have a full-blooded revolution, but I think it's really good to go like, oh, why is that a man's job? And why? And also, I think that men are getting very conflicting messages about masculinity, and I think if I was a man, I'd be very resentful of the idea that I have to spend 2 months of my wages. Why? If she wants a ring, buy a ring. If she wants a ring, let her get a ring. I'm not telling her what to do. I think one of the biggest revelations, although obviously it had been going on for a very long time, and I think people were very aware of it, was that how people who have a position of power can exploit it. So it doesn't mean that power naturally makes you a horrible person. It doesn't mean that there's nothing to enjoy about dominance. It doesn't mean you can't be a fantastic leader, all of those kind of things. And again, it doesn't have to be a kind of a gendered behaviour. That's what I think is really healthy about talking about power rather than men in power, for instance, because what becomes clear is that if you have a huge power disparity, occasionally it's very possible that the other person at the other end of that wedge is vulnerable. And so certain situations, I think we're writing better rule books now, for instance, like bosses and employees, but in particular people who are by the nature, the height of their power and position, means that there's a huge circle of people around them who are aiding and abetting the exploitation. So when you get to your Epsteins and this kind of situation, I think what people find fascinating is, this isn't one bad man operating by himself. It affects so many other people, and it all becomes so interlaced then, because either if he goes down, they go down with him, or just they don't feel like they can ever question the bad behaviour because they have food to put. They earn money to put food on the table, and I think that's what's quite insidious, quite often, and terrifying. The idea that you've got lots of good people going, but I can't put my neck out about this, or I'm done.
Yeah.